This is our reading of the Gospel of Mark, but today, during Holy Week, is one of the holiest days, second to holiest days of Holy Week, and that is Good Friday. And on Good Friday, we of course celebrate the day and remember the day that Jesus died on the cross. And of course, it sounds so unnatural to say we celebrate that on Good Friday, but in fact, in light of what we know happens, we know that it is something to think of in a celebratory way because of the goodness and the power of God that is shown with Jesus' death on the cross. But that is sometimes what we do in America, is we brush over the death, we brush over the dark stuff and the negative stuff so we can get to the good stuff. But there's something so important right now about sitting with Good Friday and sitting in the suffering, sitting in the pain. We're too quick in our Western advanced civilized world to brush past death, to brush past suffering. But I do believe there's something for us if we would choose, like many of our forefathers have, choose to sit in that suffering with Jesus, because suffering is always with God. Let me show you. Mark chapter 15 is where we're reading. And in Mark chapter 15, we are going to get Jesus' last moments in verse number 34. Mark chapter 15, 34. And at 3 p.m, which is when I'm filming this video, Jesus cried out in a loud voice in his native language, the language of Aramaic. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? My God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus screams this, declares this from the cross as he's gasping for breath and struggling and dying. Again, details you and I would prefer not to focus on so much. But here's what's interesting and what I find so curious. Every time I've read this, and when I first learned about it when I was young, growing up as a Catholic, I would hear that phrase and I would think to myself, what's the answer to the question? I mean, Jesus is asking a question. God, why have you forsaken me? What's the answer to the question? I've always wondered, is the answer, I have forsaken you? Yes. And it's because fill in the blank. Or is the answer, no, Jesus, your question is actually redundant and I have not abandoned you. I'm right. I've always wondered, what is the right answer to the question? And then what you realize is that Jesus is not just randomly shouting out in pain. He's quoting something from the Jewish scriptures. Jesus is quoting Psalm number 22. Did you know this? When you read this, it's so interesting. First of all, reading out the Psalms, I try to read a psalm in the morning, especially in this season. Before I touch my phone, I go read a book. I go read in the book of Psalms. I go read one psalm. Just before I touch my phone and look at digital news and work stuff, I just try to spend a minute with a psalm, because a psalm is literally a poem or a diary entry of David, the guy who wrote the books of Psalms, King of Israel, and this beautiful collection of his emotions, expressions. And Psalm 22 begins with this: my God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22 is actually a long, it's how many verses? It is, let me look at it here, 31 verses long of a cry out to God. God, are you there? God, do you see me? Hey, God, I'm suffering. And the way Psalm 22 ends is so beautiful. It actually responds with faith. It doesn't respond with the answer to the question being, God, I guess you're not there. No, the answer is, God, I know you'll rescue me. God, I know you'll save me. God, I know you'll redeem me. And when you do that, I'm gonna praise you. I'm gonna thank you. Psalm 22 is this ancient, like almost more than 3,000 year old, like collection of books, of poems that essentially say, God, I need your help. And God, I'm crying out to you, but I'm also trusting in you. Jesus, being a rabbi, a student of his faith, he quotes that psalm from the cross. But again, the problem is it still doesn't answer the question. Again, it doesn't answer the question like, what's the answer? I've always wondered. And I can't help but feel like the answer is something other than yes or no. The answer is, did you abandon me, God? Is it yes or no? I can't help but wonder if the answer is a third option. Because as you look at it, it sure looks like God has abandoned Jesus. And that is exactly because that's how it feels to be human, doesn't it? That's how it feels to get sick with a virus and not know if there's going to be a cure and not know if there's going to be a ventilator. It feels sometimes like God has abandoned us. You lose your job unexpectedly and your entire way of living in life and rhythm, and you lose your senior year and you lose these friendships and you can't connect with people like you used to. You think of people who have ever had a bad diagnosis. You think of people who've ever struggled with anything, who've ever dealt with loss. If you've ever dealt with, a loved one that was there and they're not there anymore. Have you ever just felt like God has abandoned you? There is a truth to the question, isn't there? Like, God, are you there? Are you listening? Did you abandon me? And Jesus himself, isn't it interesting that the Son of God, that God in the flesh asks the same question? I can't help but wonder if the answer to the question is implied in who Jesus is. My God, why have you forsaken me? Maybe the answer is, I'm right here. Maybe the answer is not, yes, I've abandoned you, or no, I'm right here. I'm going to fix all this. I'm going to save you right now and get you off that cross. Maybe the answer is, I'm right here. I'm suffering with you. What if it's possible that the most offensive image of God we could ever be given is a God who can be hurt, a God who can be wounded, a God who can suffer, a God who can be unjustly tried, a God who can be killed? What if it's possible that when we say, God, would you save this person? God, would you heal this person? God, would you help me? What if sometimes the answer to our prayer is neither the yes or the no we get from that, but it is the presence in the middle of it, that I'm not abandoning you, I suffer with you. Our temptation is to turn Jesus and to turn God into some kind of mythical being who sits on a golden chair and has a white beard and looks a lot like Zeus, and turn him into this God who's indestructible. And if you just say something, he can snap his fingers like Thanos and make things happen or make things disappear. We want a God like that. A God like that is sexy and interesting and overall fake, not real. The God that Jesus reveals is a God who can be killed, a God who suffers. And I know I can feel some of you going, well, he technically didn't, get killed all the way because, 3 days later he resurrected. I hear you. I'm with you. And that's true. But sit with me for a minute. God would let himself be so humbled that he would suffer with us. My God, why have you forsaken me? Maybe the answer is not yes or no. Maybe the answer is, I'm right here. I'm right here. And maybe what you and I are meant to do with that is transform our suffering. Maybe you and I are meant to look at suffering, this side of the cross, this side of history, forever differently. Have you ever wondered about the fact that on Easter, when Jesus is resurrected from the dead, have you ever noticed he still has his scars? In the text, in the biographies of Jesus, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it says in all of them, he still has his scars. Why would God choose a body that still has scars? Because the message is within it. That it is through our scars, it is through the suffering, it is through the death that there is life still, that there is resurrection. I wonder that if this Good Friday, the real path we are to take together is not one that says, God, would you show up and cure and fix everything? Or God, you must not be there. God must be fabricated and made up by weak religious people. Maybe there's a third answer. What if God is in the hospital room with us? What if God cries and bleeds and is wounded with us? What kind of a God is that? Obviously, when Jesus does cool things in the Bible, like walks on water and stops the storm and heals people, like it makes us go, what kind of man is this? But when Jesus dies on a cross, it raises the question, what kind of God is this? And I'll tell you what kind of God Jesus isn't. He's not the God who's fake and phony and needs your worship and your sacrifices and demands things from you. No, this is a God who bleeds and suffers with you, who shares pain. All suffering, all pain is God's pain. Maybe the greatest gift God could ever give us is not pretending to be bigger and more important and above it all. Maybe the greatest gift he's ever given us is simply his presence. Today, may you choose to be present to the presence that is always with you. May you choose to be fully present where you are on Good Friday and lean into suffering when it happens. Lean into pain. Don't run away from it. Don't try to excuse it, justify it, explain it. Don't think the answer is God has abandoned you. He's not there. And don't think the answer, he's just going to snap his fingers and fix it. Maybe the answer is find your love, your strength, your power. Find the kingdom of God in the midst of our pain, our suffering, and even our death. May you be present today to the presence that is always with us, always for us, always ahead of us, and even in suffering.